So this is Pak Sumit Duta. He's been quite a long time in HSBC, and HSBC also have collaboration with the Investment Coordinating Board, right, for investment promotions in many countries, also including in Europe.
That's right, Pa.
All right.
Yeah. So we also have Ibu Sinta. Ibu Sinta is the Vice President of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. Ibu Sinta.
Yeah, Pak.
Yeah, so I would like to introduce you to Dr. Pablo. Dr. Pablo is, has been quite some time in the region. He's advising a lot of Latin American, and European countries on how to expand here in the region, in Asia. But he is based in Singapore.
Pleasure.
Yes, pleasure meeting you too.
So we also have Pak Sumit Duta. Ibu saya kira udah kenal pasti.
Yes, Sumit, how are you?
Bahasa Indonesianya is Indonesian language is already very fluent, especially when we are in a golf course. It so happened that all of the speakers, it was not arranged in such a way, Bu Sinta. So we have the Vice Minister who is also keen golfer. We have Pak Sumit Duta is also keen golfer. And we have Dr. Pablo who is also, very keen to see the golf courses in Singapore to open. Very
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In Jakarta, there's still golf course open, believe it or not.
Yeah, Masi, and some are opening today, Bu Sinta. So from effect from the 1st of May, some new golf courses, not new, meaning they're reopening after some time. So
yeah, they said that they are applying physical distances by only limiting 2 players in one group.
That's right. 2 players per play.
Yeah, meaning that with the caddy 4, so 4 people. Yeah, but still, a little bit, nervous with these situations,
But the day is gonna come, and we're gonna play again.
That's exactly right.
And that is, I'm very confident on that. But the problem is when.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Oh, Vice Minister. Good afternoon, Pak Mahendra. So we have all of the panelists here. So I just would like to introduce you before we start the webinar. We have Pak Sumit Duta. He's the CEO of HSBC Indonesia. He's already here. And we have also Dr. Pablo, who is also the, he's a consultant. He's been in the region for quite some time. He's consulting, he's advising European companies as well as Latin American companies to expand here in Asia. And we have Ibu Sinta Kamdani, who is the Vice Chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. And we have Pak Mahendra Siregar, Ambassador Mahendra Siregar. He's the Vice Minister of the Republic of Indonesia.
Pleasure.
How are you? Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Saya tahu kapan kita mulai. Ya udah. So are we ready? Can we start? Pak Wamen?
Sure, please.
Thank you, Pak. So let's ask our colleague to open all of the participants to join. Sudah bisa semuanya? Irma?
Ya Pak, sudah Pak.
Sudah ya. So let's start. Excellency Pak Dubes Mahendra Siregar, Ambassador Mahendra Siregar, Vice Minister of the Republic of Indonesia, and also some of our colleagues, the Indonesian ambassadors' offices, who are also following this webinar, distinguished panelists, participants, Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all, and also thank you for joining this webinar in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm very pleased and honored to have some of our friends, the distinguished speakers, who are not only knowledgeable on the issues, but also have an extensive experience on the issues we are going to discuss. It is also gave me a great privilege to have Ambassador Mahendra Siregar, the Indonesian Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, whom is also not only an expert with extensive experience, but also he's been involved in economic diplomacy in Indonesia for quite some time. So the theme of this webinar is Smart Economic Partnership, Potentials for Cooperation between Indonesia and the American and European regions. As everybody knows, in the past decade, we have been experiencing impacts of trade wars, geopolitical dynamics, disruptions due to the digital technological revolution, and also many other challenges in our effort to advance partnerships with countries, especially in the American and European regions. But we are now also confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is devastating impacts to both public health, public safety, and also to the economy. So we are also note that the economy has already been intentionally shut down by the government in order to address these public health issues. The impact is certainly felt by all of the countries all over the world. There's no single countries that was not impacted by this COVID-19 pandemic. The latest figures, the Eurozone economy in the first quarter of 2020 recorded a contraction 3.8%. This is even worse than the financial crisis. While the US reported to have a contraction of 1.2% the same period, but at the annualized rate of 4.8%. Indonesia, based on the previous experiences, was able to recover quite faster due to the big domestic economy and also our dependency on the domestic economy. Therefore, we hope to tap the minds of the keynote speakers and also the panelists on how to move forward to anticipate the trend in short, medium, and long term, including in the immediate term of the post-COVID-19 pandemic. Before proceeding further, let me just inform the participants that most of those involved in this webinar are our colleagues from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, especially in the Director General of American and European Affairs. We have also some ambassadors of the Republic of Indonesia or head of missions in some countries in Europe and America. And also we have our distinguished friends from different ministries in Indonesia, as well as our colleague from Kadin associations. And we also have two of our colleagues from the media who is also participating here. So for the housekeeping arrangement, I would like to kindly ask participants to please remember to turn off your microphone if you are not speaking. Number two, we will provide you with the materials. If you need them, we will send it to you. And we will also record this conversation. And in the discussion segment, please place your specific questions to any of the panelists in the Zoom chat So I will collect them for the respective panelists to respond. So let's now enter into the first session. Let us now invite Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, His Excellency Ambassador Mahendra Siregar, to deliver his keynote speech. But before asking him to start the presentation, let me make a short introduction of Vice Minister's extensive curriculum vitae. Prior to his appointment as the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, he has served previously as the Indonesian ambassador to the US in Washington, D.C., the chairman of the Indonesian Investment Coordinating Board, BKPM, Ketua BKPM, Vice Minister of Finance, Vice Minister of Trade, Chairman or CEO of Indonesian Exim Bank, and also Deputy Coordinator for the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. So with that introduction, Pak, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ngurah Swajaya, for inviting me to speak before this distinguished panelists and audience. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the speakers. I would like to welcome and certainly a pleasure to meet with you, Dr. Pablo Lizana Allende, the President of Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. And of course, my very good friend, Shinta Kamdani, the Vice Chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce, and my friend Sumit Duta, the President Director of the HSBC Indonesia. And certainly I would like to thank and express great appreciation to Ngurah Swajaya for arranging this meeting together with colleagues from the DG of America and Europe. And if people has doubt whether we can be as productive doing our work in this special circumstances of working from home, I think this webinar in a way is a good evidence that sometimes you can even be more productive, because it's a holiday now in Indonesia. It's a Labor Day, it's a holiday. You should not supposed to work, but yet we have this seminar. So in that sense, it's either we are very productive, or probably Ambassador Ngurah Swajaya does not remember that this is a holiday, because for him and many of us, it doesn't really make any difference whether it's a holiday or not, because we are staying at home anyway. Now, obviously, the aim of this virtual meeting is to understand and discuss with the speakers and participants about the future of the America and European regions in relation to how Indonesia and our region, for that matter, should anticipate and promote economic potentials and better relationships. And I, while tend to prefer we talk about the situation in post-COVID-19 pandemic, but we also have to prepare that this pandemic, subject to the discovery of the vaccine, might stay with us for some time. So yes, of course, we prefer to talk about the post-COVID-19 pandemic situation. But if you refer to the prominent Bill Gates' outlook on when the vaccine could be discovered and distributed, that would take some 18 months, let's say, since early this year. So we might have to live with the virus in the next 12 months. So that is also a challenge of itself. While we hope for the cure or the drugs, the situation would be much better, and we hope that we would be able to discover the effective drugs or medicines to recover from the infection sooner, I hope in the second part of this year. But for the vaccine, it might take some time, so we might also have to live with the virus for some time. And of course, we have to develop that scenario in our mind. Now, with going back to the main theme of this meeting, let me mention 3 points in general sense. First is the disruption of the COVID-19 and the government's lockdown policies toward the global economy and the global value chain. And then second, how this has impacted and will affect further geopolitical and geoeconomic situations. And third, I would mention about Indonesia and the region's strategic view within the future geopolitical and global economic realms. Now, first on the impact of the COVID-19 to the world economy and global value chain, referring to Ambassador Ngurah earlier comment that the IMF expected that the global economy would face a recession this year of -3%, and hopefully would expect a growth of more than 5% next year. That is already a big shock to all of us to expect the world growth to shrink, or the world economy to shrink by 3% this year. But if we look at the more recent data, the IMF base case scenario outlook now probably is too optimistic, even with that already shocking outlook figure. It looks like we might have to endure -5% or even more of the global economic situation this year. So the recession would be more severe than what the IMF is expecting. And especially it's caused by the more severe recession taking place in the US and Europe. So this is relevant not only for the global economic picture, but with our discussion this afternoon, because the latest figure shows that even the first quarter of this year would be worse than already the expectation of the whole year growth of -3%, while we should expect the second quarter would be worse than the first quarter, because the second quarter, practically the whole 3 months would face the whole lockdown, while the first quarter, only the last 6 weeks faced the lockdown. So we should expect a worse situation in this year rather than expected by the IMF. Now, what that also bring the lesson learned to many of the countries is that governments as well as industries take a lesson learned that the global value chain should not rely on a single source of supply. And I think this, I will elaborate later on in the other 2 points, would remain with us post the COVID-19 situation, because governments and industries, major corporations understand now the risk management of having a single source supply for the final goods as well as for the intermediary inputs of their production are just too risky. So they want to see diversification, and they want to see that beyond just the issue of efficiency. So this is, I think, the first point I'd like to highlight that would be relevant to our discussion. That is, the global economic outlook would be worse than what is expected. And of course, the lesson learned that the single source global value chain is just too risky, and countries, governments, industries, economies would like to diversify. Now, the second point is that while COVID-19 certainly amplified this, but even before the COVID-19 took place, and I think we should also anticipate this situation to get more serious in the future, is the severe geopolitical competition between US and China. So I think this is almost a given factor. What happened, disregarding what happened with the COVID-19 situation, and of course, the COVID-19 situation makes things more obvious that we should expect geopolitical competition between the two superpowers would be heightened in the future, while the European influence is diminishing because of the economic performance, but also because of the internal situation within the European Union in particular in promoting unity and solidarity. So this would be the main aspect or factor need to be considered when we talk about the global situation on the political sense. And of course, this has two prongs of risk for the region and for Indonesia, for that matter. Indonesia, in terms of economic interests, of course, has widely diversified trade, investment, and economic partners. We have very strong relations with the US, and we have a very strong relations, economic trade investment with China, and even much stronger growth in the last few years. So in economic front, we might not have any issue with this geopolitical competition going forward. But in terms of political stability, it's a different matter. Of course, our region will very much have to anticipate the challenges of this more severe competition between the two superpowers. And Indonesia, as always consistently a strong proponent of multilateral organization solutions, would certainly have strong interest to ensure that the multilateral, the international, and regional organizations would function well and even better in addressing or lessening the situations with regard to this geopolitical situation. Now, the third factor I would like to mention in this occasion is that looking at these developments or situations, what would be Indonesia, and I think it's not only Indonesia, but I would look from the ASEAN's perspective, interest and position or repositioning, I would say. And on that, I would say that this is actually maybe the term might not be the most appropriate, but opportunity, I would say. despite the situation, for ASEAN, for the region, to graduate from where we are now to a different level, to a higher level. In the economic front, ASEAN is well known to be a key factor within particular countries' global value chain. Let that be ASEAN, China, Japan, Korea. So I think we have an important role as part of with position major economies in the region. But I think we have to understand that ASEAN's future role is much bigger than that, because for sure, the major economic powers and industries have very strong confidence on ASEAN. ASEAN is a reliable and trustworthy partners. We don't have hidden agenda. We are always open. We are always have good relations with all partners in the world. So that is always our main capital. But on the other hand, we also have to understand that ASEAN has become and will certainly become more important in the future as the markets of final goods and services. So not just as part of the global value chain, but ASEAN's growing income of the middle class would or has made ASEAN itself a very sizable market for goods and services. And this is very key within the global economic situation. The bargaining power of a region or an economy in the world going forward is not only about competitiveness and efficiency, but also how large is their domestic and regional market. And ASEAN is very important there. And if you look at all indicators and outlooks from the international organization, investment banks, all the rating agencies, ASEAN is probably the only region in the world that is expected still to have positive growth in 2020. So that is another reality. Just imagine if we can have the turnaround, the rebound of the global economy, then ASEAN would certainly become very important engine of growth. Now, within that economic situation, I think it's important to put the new strategic vision of ASEAN. That is the ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This is where I think we need to graduate ourselves from only looking what's happening within and internal ASEAN members and between ASEAN and other strategic partners to the whole region of the Indo-Pacific. Because then this is again an outlook that has been recognized and welcomed by the major powers in the world, where ASEAN can play a central and to a drive because its importance in the global and political and economic situations. So Indonesia is more than ready to really take along the whole ASEAN members and strategically make use of this reposition and welcome all partners globally to look at that. And this is what I think is important for us to look when we want to build relations with other countries and other regions in the world. And of course, nationally, Indonesia will continue focusing on its economic and many other socio-political reforms and legal reforms, and at the same time promoting investment in many of the industries that, again, I think the lesson learned of the COVID-19 that we have learned sometimes that we don't care or take care properly. Many of our industries now, we learn some the hard way in how to improve that situation, and we want to ensure that our measures would improve the conditions of many of our manufacturing sectors, as well as continuing building infrastructure and promoting human quality development. So I better stop there. And again, thank you for having this seminar. And thank you for the speakers, and I'm giving back this to Ambassador Ngurah. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih, Pak Mahendra. I think you raised very important points. You know, the dependency on a single production, which is not good for the world in the future. Number two, geopolitical competition or rivalry will still be there. And I think the third point is, of course, the strategy is how we will be able to bring together the ASEAN region in promoting what we are going to do also in Indonesia. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Pablo Allende. He is the chairman of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce, Singapore. Before he's delivering his remark or presentations, I just would like to introduce Dr. Pablo curriculum vitae. Other than as a good friend of mine, Dr. Pablo also have a very vast experience for 24 years in the region as top management consulting, advising European and Latin American companies for their expansion as well as optimization here in Asia. So I think he has been already doing this for more than 1 decade. So we would like to tap your mind. So Dr. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Noguda. It's a pleasure. Thank you to all the audience, particularly His Excellency and Vice Minister Mahendra Siregar. Good afternoon. Ambassador Noguda Swajarya, thank you for the invitation to today's event. The excellencies around the world, and now I feel a little bit insecure saying good morning, good afternoon, or good night. So the best is to say maybe good day to everybody, to the fellow speakers, Shinta and Sumit, audience, ladies and gentlemen, good day. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this event, Ambassador. It is an honor for us to be here. We are quite excited to share with you and the audience our knowledge about the region to support Indonesia's path going forward. Well, the starting point, and let me quickly, I'm in the process of that, of loading the presentation, which is coming soon. Give me a second, please. All right. Hello. So can we see the presentation?
Not yet. Yeah, it's getting there.
Is the Can we see the presentation? Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. So it is actually the introduction, Excellency Mahendra Sirega, is exactly the aspect to start with. I would like to start my presentation indeed by quickly recapping what is currently happening in many countries. This has been addressed actually by His Excellency Mahendra Sirega, because we are all in the clause of COVID-19. The pandemic originated by COVID and is having enormous impact on all economies across the entire world. Nobody is left out. And governments are applying, of course, severe measures to manage the spread of the virus. But at the same time, they are already starting to look at how to mitigate the economic impact of shocks like these going forward. So the key words, and this is what we just heard in the introduction we just heard, is the reduction of dependencies and the increase of diversification. So the reduction of dependencies is absolutely linked with the words global supply chain and the wider meaning of a global supply chain. And the second is the increase of diversification, which is at the end of the day, risk management. And if we look a little bit closer in diversification, and this has been already mentioned as well, Vice Minister, is the effect of diversification as a first important measure, which is the meaning of collaborations. So to reassess bi- and multilateral economic relations is a consequence of doing diversification. So having mentioned these and looking at the content of today's event, it is exactly the question we are addressing, and is a question Indonesia is addressing in the context of exploring or intensifying relations with regions partly far away, which seems to be far away, as Latin America, or intensifying relations with Europe. And if we look at these, so the question, and this is the content I would like to describe in the next minutes, the key question to address is what might be the role? What might be the role, and therefore the contribution of Europe and Latin America to Indonesia's development going forward? And this is the frame for the strategic analysis we're going to do to assess this question. If I move on to the next slide, I'm just giving in these slides a bit of structure on what to expect in the slides to come. I would like to, in a sense of a macroeconomic snapshot of Latin America and Europe, to touch the topics of the current economic situation, the potentials of the respective regions, and the trends of the respective regions, which are quite the important part to discuss maybe as well after the presentation. This is one block. And in the second block, and as Vice Minister mentioned, we cannot keep apart the impact of COVID-19, not only in a short term, it's gonna be around for some time. So what is the impact of COVID-19 in the regions right now? This is the second block. And I would like to finalize with a few words what might be strategic consequences to derive recommendation for both regions when where to focus on. All right, if we start with Latin America. Latin America, a huge continent starting from the south border of the United States until the south of Chile and Argentina, comprising more than 40 countries, in South America 13, in Central America 8, and in the Caribbean region 21. So let's have a quick look at what are some key indicators of the region in the macroeconomic perspective. A GDP of billions, 5,800 billion US dollars, that's the GDP of the region, an average growth of 0.4% in the last 4 years only, and the GDP per capita of a bit below $9,000 per capita. A population of around 660 million and to an unemployment rate of around 8%. Important, the poverty rate, which is a characteristic of the region, approximately 30%, meaning we have around 200 million people living in poverty. A debt rate amounting to an average of over 40%, and an export and import structure characterized by trading mainly with the US, Europe, and East Asia apart from the region itself. Southeast Asian countries slowly start to become a target. If we look at what is the potential of the region and described by where is the market allocated, we see the major countries being in Brazil and in Mexico with GDP of 1,870 billion US dollar and 210 million in population for Brazil, and Mexico with 1,220 billion US dollars and more than 120 million population. So the focus is in these two countries, which is the majority, both of them amounting to a little bit more than 50% of the total GDP. The most relevant sectors for Latin America being the mining, which is becoming more and more a strategic sector because of the materials. So we have copper, lithium, gold, silver, nickel, iron, niobium, and a few more. But why strategic? Because these products, these raw materials are getting more and more into quite developed applications such as the e-mobility, the batteries, so the development of the batteries for the e-mobility, etc. Agriculture, and that's where we say producers for the world, where we have products like coffee, soy, sugarcane, corn, etc. So being important part for the world, exporting quite significant amount of these products to the world. And the third factor, which is quite important and is sitting quite strongly, the region, is tourism. Now, with this snapshot, quite quick, what are the trends we are observing? And here are some important trends which have been mentioned and which is as well a kind of base for further develop exchange. The first one is linked to the word value chain. The countries are not industrialized countries as we know them from the US or from Europe. These are countries in the process of developing their economies. And therefore, the countries are working in developing along the value chain in order to provide more value add and putting it black and white, not to export only the raw material, is to go 1, 2, or 3 steps beyond that. So to have an escalate, to have a development along the value chain. This is an important factor for developing the country. The second point is the countries are quite hungry and hungry for new technologies, adopting new technologies, because the need to digitalize the economy or digitalize actually the entire country is gonna be very soon part of a basic requirement to be competitive. And so it is important for each of these countries to look for these technologies, either by developing them by themselves, which is quite challenging for Latin America and for countries within Latin America, or to cooperate. And the third trend, which is very much discussed, is the realizing that cooperation within Latin America, within the countries in Latin America and outside Latin America is beneficial in developing the country. And there, you know, the different agreements or cooperations like Pacific Alliance, Mercosur within Latin American countries, or DEPA, Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, outside with, in this case, Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore, or TPP. So what we see in a snapshot is we have an enormous region, we have developing economies, and we have potential. So this is a little bit the fact situation for now in short. In the next slide, I would like to discuss a little bit what happens if we add the layer COVID. and the impact of COVID on Latin America. And we saw a few values. Ambassador, Vice Minister mentioned already what we're expecting for the world in decrease of economic output. In Latin America, we have a quite similar number. Well, we talked about 3% for the world, but we're talking in Latin America for 5.3% decrease in GDP. And being South America contributing, I mean, only looking at South America having 5.2% decrease. The unemployment rate expected to increase by 3.4% to 11.5%, making around 40 million people in total unemployed. And the poverty rate expected to rise by almost 4.5% to a total of amounting to a total of more than 200 million people. So this is the impact on this sense. What are the reasons for these? And these are not only reasons applying to Latin America, I think to many countries and many regions in the world. Of course, the first point, the collapsing of the international commerce. And the second point, decrease of prices of raw materials. And the combination of these two is hitting Latin America quite strong. As I mentioned, that one of the key export materials are raw materials for Latin America, going to China, going to Europe, to countries, adding value to the raw product and developing products and applications to develop end products. Risk aversion and the reduced demand of tourism, another reason tourism hitting Latin America, particularly Central America, quite hard. Now the question, if that's the situation, the question is what to do. What are the reactions the countries and the regions can have to counterattack the impact of COVID? And in Latin America, we have unfortunately quite limited opportunity, limited options. Due to the fiscal situation we have, taxes, and due to the high amount of debt we have, on average over 44%, some countries even reaching values like 70% external debt. But nevertheless, the short and medium measures, the countries, of course, are doing whatever they can in the frame they can react to stabilize the region. And of course, all the countries defined compelling packages to support the economy, to support corporates, to support households, to support self-employees, to try to get the economy running and to avoid more problems in the countries. But what happens as well is that the assessment, the current assessment is what I'm describing in the slide. These might not be enough. And voices saying we need support from international institutions, for example, such as the IMF or the World Bank, to provide additional support. The recovery is going to take some time in Latin America. I'm coming back to this point in a few more minutes. But interesting is as well, what is medium to long term? And this is a little bit as well, lessons learned, what Vice Minister described already. What are the lessons learned countries are learning? And on a medium to long term, we are observing a discussion around the benefit of multilateralism. It is a discussion. And this is the point I'm addressing in the slide with intensification of multilateralism fragility. So globalization will not roll back, but there will be more and more regionalized global economy centered around three poles, which is Europe, North America, and Asia. These as well as a consequence to the discussion and the analysis of the problem value chains, global value chains. And if this is going to happen, what does it mean for Latin America? And the answer is a little bit as well what I mentioned a few minutes ago as a trend is the regional integration. Behind the regional integration thoughts, we started already quite successful with the Pacific Alliance and with Mercosur, is the conviction that together we can be stronger and we can move forward. And this inter-regional integration is the first step to, to continue with this direction and to integrate more countries into these thoughts, the thought of integrating. And that's the reason why we are talking about the prerequisite Latin American countries coordination on macroeconomic and production matters is crucial. So these all to reduce the dependency we talked at the beginning and to be a little bit still competitive in the bigger frame of having 3 poles in the world, in the US, in Europe, and in East Asia. Well, with these words, Latin America, with this comment, just a summary. For Latin America, we are seeing, and this is a little bit the short, medium, long term, Latin America is gonna go through the phase of recovering quite a while. There is some homework to do, is to stabilize the entire situation, economy, which is gonna take some more time. The foundation of the potential of the region is there. We need to reactivate that over the next month, years. And in this context, it is not only the regional integration, it is as well the overseas integration with countries in similar situations going through the same path to recover. If we now look quickly as well, again, into Europe. In Europe, we are talking about, well, 44 countries. And as you know, we have Europe 27 and the rest of Europe. If we look at the key data and we go through a GDP of 13,000, almost 14,000 billion euros, we have a GDP per capita of over 30,000 euros for the EU 27 countries. Population of 450 million and an unemployment rate of 6.7%. Interesting export-import structure characterized by trading mainly within Europe, and outside Europe is the US and China. That's where the basic, the main products overseas and comes from are going to. Southeast Asian countries slowly starting to become a target. Major countries, Germany and France, with both summing up both around 50%, around 30%, 35% of the total GDP, similar in the population. Most relevant sectors, and I'm going to address this in a few more minutes, actually many. But most important, automotive, machinery, both quite strong in Germany, France, chemical, pharmaceuticals, Germany, Switzerland in brackets, not being part of the EU27. I'm going to address the sectors in a few more minutes. Interesting and important is what are the trends we are observing in Europe. The first is the strong focus on developing and use of new technologies. It is the developing and adopt the new technologies. And what technologies? Everything. It is everything related to smart cities, etc. It is everything related to tech, so fintech, health tech, agri-tech, whatever. It is everything related to Industry 4.0, and Industry 4.0 is a very wide concept. So Europe is keen to keep the technological position they have in the world, and if possible, to get even more advantage. This is an asset, and the infrastructure for doing so is very strong, particularly in Germany. Second point, the monitoring of additional international markets. And this is related again to what we just talked, global value chains. I fully agree with the concept one source. It's not enough, particularly after seeing what is the impact we have with a situation like we have with COVID. It is to look at markets for export, of course, why not? New markets. And there is a reciprocal behavior. For example, Indonesia. If Indonesia, as one of the big important pillars, declaring Industry 4.0 is a pillar, this is a market for German products. But it's not only the market to sell, it is the market for sourcing, it is the market for manufacturing. And the market for manufacture, so the market in terms of where to manufacture. And this is the point linking to the last aspect I want to mention, evaluating the future role of global supply chains. Another trend, but there is no clear path so far. Why am I saying this? Because we have the discussion, there is the discussion to bring back manufacturing lines from, for example, Asia back to Germany. Why to do so? Or back to Europe, why to do so? And what is the key prerequisite for doing so? It is if the question behind is cost. If the costs are allowing us to do so, maybe we would consider to do it. But the cost is going to be only achieved, and this is the rationale behind, if technology supports. So if manufacturing is based on an intensive amount of technology, then there is a reason to discuss about that. So the other question is what, I mean, regarding what to do with a manufacturing plant, there are plenty of other alternatives in the world where to place it. And this is as well diversification. So the diversification concept linked to global supply chains, reducing dependency, is a very, very broad one. And there are a lot of opportunities for many countries. If we, okay, we're going to come back to these as well. If we move on, and I would like to, as I mentioned, to very shortly elaborate on the sectors. Europe has many sectors, as you know, where these different countries are very strong in. But these are the base sectors building the foundation of the economy. And these sectors, and this is a hypothesis I'm bringing into the discussion, basically, we are gonna keep these sectors. What is gonna change is the enabling to be more efficient in these sectors. And this is what we're seeing on the right-hand side, strategic sectors in inverted commas. Because the points we are seeing on the right-hand side where countries are developing products for Industry 4.0, so automation in manufacturing plants, communication technology, robotics. Robotics is an enabler for Industry 4.0. Sensorics, artificial intelligence, software. All these points on the right-hand side, it is not easy, I know, but all these are elements going into the existing industries and changing the dynamics of the industries. And this is what is happening right now, and what is changing the entire sector structure of the countries. What's happening now is we are changing the dynamics by introducing new enablers. Is that a strong step forward? It is a very strong step forward. But the consequence of this is, if countries are going to achieve this status of efficiency, and therefore the corporates in the countries are going to achieve this status of efficiencies, countries like those in Latin America, they have to follow if they want to compete in this sector. So this is the comment, and this is a quite important comment with regards to the strategic sectors and the role of the topics I'm listing in the slide. Now, before finalizing, one more comment to what is the impact of COVID to Europe. I decided to put this just in a few numbers, and it's to illustrate these. We are seeing a table, and if you look at the two orange columns I have highlighted, we are seeing the numbers for GDP for the European Union 27, where we are expecting a decrease of minus a little bit more than 5%. And we are seeing what is the recovery, so the next column, what is the recovery expected for the year to come? We are seeing 5.9% for the EU27. Corresponding data for unemployment rate, but what is the consequence or what is the interpretation of these? And this is a little bit different to what we just saw for Latin America. Recovery is expected for the coming year. So a 5.9, and that's what His Excellency Vice Minister mentioned as well for the world. It's a recovery in terms of achieving the same value, the same level we had before the impact of COVID-19. So recovery is expected soon. And of course, and I'm pretty sure this is gonna happen. It depends, of course, what is gonna be the impact over the next month of COVID. We don't know when this is gonna finish. We don't know whether the so-called second wave and maybe third wave are coming. This has to be monitored. But one thing I'm quite certain, Europe is going to react calm, but quite decisive. And once it can, it's going to be very fast because everybody is seeing opportunities in the situation we have. Adjusting as well the country strategies according to the experience we had, and adjusting as well all the corporate strategies. What has validity on a macro sense has validity on the corporate sector as well. All corporates are looking to mitigate the risk in the future by reducing dependencies and by increasing diversification. We don't need to go through the details of what are measures. You are familiar, but the key measures are the same: support self-employment, support corporates, and support households with significant amount of capital. For example, Germany around 1,000 billion euros, France with almost 400 billion euros, etc., etc. Now, if we move on, and this is my final slide, after having get the impressions of the two regions, Latin America and Europe, what is the conclusion and what might be a recommendation for Indonesia? And now we are putting Indonesia in the center, in the focus of our observations. Of course, the strategy to derive depends on what is the target picture Indonesia is looking at. And the target picture, I'm just describing it on the left-hand side of the slide as a kind of in principle illustration described by the three key pillars: Industry 4.0, infrastructure, and tourism. And now the question, what might be a strategy towards Latin America? And of course, in the positive sense, because that's bilateral. The benefit for Indonesia from Latin America, and at the same time, what might be the benefit of Latin America in cooperating with Indonesia? And to me, there are two topics to address. The first is to promote exchange on common themes. For example, the development or the experiences in all the technological sectors we have been talking. So all the techs, so the health tech, agri-tech, etc., and all the smarts we are developing. Smart cities as a key prerequisite to further develop. This is one, so exchange. And the second is to create the frame conditions to facilitate trade. So to continue on these, continue creating the frame conditions for the countries. So developing new agreements if needed, in line, of course, in this case with Indonesia's strategy, or to continue dialogue with countries to become part of an existing agreement, as for example, extension of ideas, Pacific Alliance, or DIPA, DIPA being Digital Economic Partnership Agreement. So, whereas for Europe, if we look at Europe, is strengthen the cooperation to benefit from the technology know-how in Europe, particularly Germany, to develop the areas of Industry 4.0. And the second, and this is important, is the question related to, do we have as a country the readiness to attract this technology? Do we have the readiness to attract the corporates of these countries and the readiness in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of preparing the corresponding infrastructure. And the last point I'm mentioning is customize. What do I mean with customize? To listen very carefully, what is, for example, in this case, Europe, France, Germany looking at? What is what they are looking at? Because for them to export to Indonesia, for example, is diversification, is enabling companies, corporates in Indonesia to progress. And if that's the case, if the platform is developing in Indonesia, Indonesia is getting a more attractive market to approach. It is diversification at the end of the day. And with this remark, I would like to finalize, and I would like to thank the audience for the attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pablo, for such a comprehensive presentation. And I think your last question concerning whether we are ready or not, it will be responded by Ibu Sinta, hopefully in her presentation. So before giving the floor to Ibu Sinta, just a short introduction. Ibu Sinta is the owner and CEO of Sintesa Group, Indonesian firms with 16 subsidiaries operating in property, energy, industrial, and consumer products. She also received many awards in her field, and chief among them is she was the 50 Powerful Business Woman in Asia in 2012, 2013, and 2016. So the floor is yours, Bu Sinta.
Thank you, Pangura, for the nice introduction. I'm just going to go straight to my presentation because I'm aware of the time. You know, I think we're really running past time. So if you don't mind, I will go directly to my presentation. And I think when I prepared it and, you know, trying to think of post-pandemic, it's a very tough thing to do because at the moment, I think all businesses are trying to survive. So I think the mode right now is still in survival mode. So to think beyond that is very tough, but I understand that as business, we do need to think what will happen once we can rebound. So let's start. I think when we talk about post-pandemic recovery, we need to know when will this be? Because right now it's all prediction, but nobody really know when will actually happen. So I'm just modeling one that was made by Singapore University of Design Technology. I think they say that Indonesia will subside by 99% by end of June, and Indonesia post-pandemic can be as early as July. Now, however, I have to say that this is not feasible to us to go back to our pre-pandemic economic performance if the world is still sick. So the world is projected to be in the pandemic until end of the year. So I think this is something that we need to be aware of. Now, if we look at this particular table, I think I'm just sharing what McKinsey has done. So the first scenario is, this is more the realistic one, in which we'll take control of the pandemic, but since the virus have a recurrence nature, overall global recovery will be slow. And in this scenario, recovery in China will be only fourth quarter of 2021. And it will be for the US, I think first quarter or even 2023, and Europe third quarter of 2023. So this is, I think, one scenario that McKinsey was putting down. And the second scenario, sorry. The second scenario, The second scenario is the optimistic scenario, in which sorry. Second scenario, I'm trying to work on. Yeah. The second scenario is the more optimistic one, in which this scenario, I think China and US are both projected to have positive growth by fourth quarter of 2020, and Europe and the world will rebound in the first quarter of 2021. So that's the projection at this point. But I think what is important is what is the potential business changes in the post-pandemic area? I have to say that we will not go back ever to normal situation. I have to say that we will have a new normal. So we need to bear in mind that every crisis brings changes to business. And I think it happened also when we had the 98 crisis, the 2009 crisis. This is obviously bring significant changes to many businesses. First, I think what we need to understand is the potential business changes that may occur. The response to this pandemic really shocked business so much that global businesses have been starting to recalculate the factor affecting business competitiveness and resilience. And particularly if they are running in multiple countries. This can be anything from countries' healthcare services to prudence in pandemic control measures that the business best. These new factors will be in addition to existing factor, which is primarily on top of business efficiency factor. I need to highlight that business cost efficiency will still matter for all business in post-pandemic era, especially because we are going to face economic recovery in stages. So this is not going to happen all at once. And as business also need to offset our internal damages loss and market with less purchasing power than the pre-pandemic market. And the second potential change will be in the supply chain diversification. I think this was mentioned before also by Pablo. The trade war has made global businesses to diversify production base from China. This is especially happening now. But this pandemic also warned us the importance of domestic supply chain to sustain a continuous production when global chains is severely disrupted. So if Indonesia wants to be a good production base for global business, we should also improve our own domestic supply chain as well efficiently. And the third is business may accelerate adoption of technology, and this was mentioned as well. And this plays a very important role, including the confinement of home. So this is the first time that we actually have full working from home, and many organization companies are not really ready with this. I think this means Industry 4.0 will be accelerated, and this is good and bad news for Indonesia, as technology adoption in our industry is not that high yet, and we need a lot of capital to do so. And the fourth is the business will adopt a more balanced consumer approach. We are not only talking about balance in online or online offline, but also domestic global consumer, so that damages in the domestic market can be offset by the international market and vice versa. Now, I want to just share with you quickly some of the damages that's happening. So I want to share with you the model of the economic damages that happen that they cause businesses in Indonesia. I think it depends on the spread of the pandemic. On the best case scenario, we will have a more controlled pandemic in terms of number of spread and fatality rate, and this will be on a more U-shape. In this scenario, we need to create continuous economic interventions, and our market is normalized, and market mechanism take over role of government stimulus to put in the economy. And the second is the worst case scenario, and this is the L shape, in which it will bring out of control recession, and with severe damages in the form of layoff, bankruptcy, and of overpressure of the financial sector. Now, how is this impacting the macroeconomic side? So in the demand side, we will experience damages to the due to the demand shock for sure. And damages will occur in the form of sudden and significant drop of a postponement to investment activities during this pandemic. We will have extremely low consumption due to drop sudden in income and sudden freeze of commerce activities due to, obviously now we also have quarantine measure. And we can remedy these damages through improved government consumption and social safety net program to protect purchasing power and provide people basic necessities. And the second is the supply shock. And there will be disruption to 70% of this production inputs, and we imported from the world. And we will also have to stop production in factories in red zones in which most of our industrial estates are located. And to remedy this damage, we need to accelerate substitutive local productions. So, pandemic in industrial estate and protecting production activities in the green zone. So this is, I think, some of the measures that needs to be taken. Now, I also want to share with you the spectrum of potential damages in Indonesia real sectors. I think we have the potential winners, we have the potential losers. We can see that. I think tourism, transportations definitely impacted the most. But I think while this diagram seems to be reasonable as well, the winners and loser, I think we need to also have the projection discount a number of factors which may cancel out the benefits. And some of it is significant increase in the price of input production due to global supply shortage or significant logistic problem in which right now we're facing. The second is limit to the transferability of the increased production cost to end user given the significantly lower purchasing power in crisis. The third is the problem with generating sufficient supply or service reliability to gain most of the increased demand as investment to increase production or service. And also to be sustainable post-COVID. And the systemic implication to global supply chain disruption may prevent also those businesses to run smoothly or efficiently and to gain much profit from this crisis. So here you see that even some winners may be also impacted at the end of the day. Now I wanted to just share with you quickly some of the stimulus that our government has been giving, focusing on the healthcare, social security, and in industry. As you see right now, the number is 405 trillion that the government is proposing. We believe that this is definitely not sufficient. Is it too little, too late? Not sure, but basically we need to be bigger and faster. So the number that actually we submit to our government is 1,600 trillion. And that's about 10% of our GDP. At the moment, the number that's given by government is only about 2.5%. Many other countries has a minimum of 10% of GDP on providing stimulus for COVID. Now, not touching too much detail, but I just want to share some of the issues that all the stimulus are given, but we have some challenges, and these are some of the challenges that we're facing right now. I think limited fund allocation to remedy all businesses. Of course, data is a big problem to deliver social security, delay in stimulus distribution and claim process due to inefficiency. And of course, the bottleneck of credit stimulus delivery. And this is really important because we need to do restructuring from the bank, and yet the bank is also later maybe Amit can share also from the banking sector. But I wanted to share also the projected post-pandemic carry-out damages to Indonesia. This is given by the Ministry of Finance. And worst scenario, we will growth about 2.3%, and we will have additional 1.16 million poor people, additional of 2.92 million unemployment. This is really, I think, unemployment is something that really concerns us, because at the moment the number is picking up very, very quickly, bi-weekly. And when we talk about unemployment, it's not really just termination, because obviously right now many companies doesn't even have the cash to terminate, but more of unpaid leave. Jadi people yang dirumahkan. So these are some of the projection that's given. In the worst scenario, our growth will be only minus 0.4%, and unemployment can go all the way to 5.23 million. And this is also the projected damages in purchasing power. We all know that the national economy is greatly depending on our domestic consumption. So with higher poverty rate and unemployment rate, our purchasing power will be significantly lower than the pre-pandemic era. And I think this is something that we really need to look at. Okay, now I was asked to also touch a little bit about the role of omnibus law post-pandemic. So I have to say that I wanted to share what is the importance actually of on the omnibus law, or what we call the RUU Cipta Kerja in this. I think in the post-pandemic, we will have many burdens. It is not only the carried out pandemic damages that I just mentioned to you, but there are also persistent pre-pandemic economic features, which will challenge our capability to rebound and have higher economic growth post-pandemic. And you can see, it can be summarized on the slide. This is really our biggest issue right now, because of course, it was mentioned, if we want to look at rebound, we want to look at recovery, we need to be ready. Indonesia need to be ready to get and attract all this investment as well. And I think if we can really see this, one of the solution with the omnibus law is exactly that, is how we can really attract more investment and create more jobs. So as the background of the omnibus, I don't want to go through detail, but just very quickly, I think we see the need of omnibus because of the hyper regulations. That's we are over regulated. And this is not just from the central government, but also from the regional government. It's also, we also have issues on competitiveness. And I think this is, we are less competitive in many of our neighboring countries. Also on the employment, right now the unemployment so prior to COVID is 7 million. But as you know, with COVID and everything, it definitely will increase unemployment. But our biggest worry is also the informal worker. So we have now part-time and informal worker, we have about 70 million. And this is really the high number, and this is what our biggest concern is, including our MSME. So MSME contribute about 60% of our GDP and absorbing more than 97%. So these are the one that's really impacted also during COVID, and we need to really find solution in how to for them to really pick up their businesses. And I think global economy, we understand that. On the so this is really why the omnibus or the RUU Cipta Kerja is very important, because we need the economic growth, we need the economic equity and economic resilience and economic competitiveness. So basically, we do need to create more jobs post-COVID, and we need to bring more investment coming into Indonesia. If we look at here, well, I mentioned before that I think the high layoff and bonus demography, unemployment, and business need to create even higher efficiency and restructuring to survive. As you know, right now, Indonesia, the government is looking through whether they're postponing the discussion of the employment cluster within the omnibus. And this is something that is very worrying for us, because I think despite, you know, it's opinions from the labor unions and so forth, I think we really need this to be included and integrated, because the most important is at the moment, the existing law is not workable anymore. Many of the existing law needs to be revised. I'm talking about Law 13, number 2003. So we need to understand that there's definitely a shift of jobs already. The kind of how we operate business is also very different. So employment needs to be taken care differently. So this is not just about minimum wage or severance pay, it goes beyond that. And we need a lot of training, you know, rescaling, upscaling, and so forth. We need to do better link and match. So I think we can't afford not to include this employment cluster from the omnibus itself. Now, how the omnibus potential affect Indonesia ease of doing business? I think we clearly believe that Indonesia rank at the moment is stagnant at 273. I think with this, it's definitely will also improve our ease of doing business. I think efficiency problems in starting a business can be with this law can really be improved, including dealing with permits and registering property, construction permit, also efficiency in trading across border. I think although it's not specifically addressed, but definitely will help. So yes, it will impact our ease of doing business. Also, if we look at the global competitiveness in the index, we will also see that I think if our lowest score is in innovation ecosystem, especially innovation capability, the market, particularly labor and product market, and human capital, particularly the skill in human capital. So this will all be addressed in the omnibus. And I think the skill and labor market scores will be improved by this, especially the employment clauses, as I mentioned. So it will improve our competitive index. Now, the strategy post-pandemic cooperation, I think this is interesting. I think, as explained earlier, the global markets will have a gradual recovery. And we need to strategize our global engagement based on our partners' pace of recovery as well. The data here shows that the non-traditional economy partners like Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, Colombia, Portugal, Brazil, Peru, Poland, Chile, have more optimistic and more inclination to make increased household spending in post-pandemic than our traditional economic partners like the US, UK, and so forth. So this is interesting just to see the pace post-pandemic. This is to say that the non-traditional countries are actually highly potential to be engaged as our business partner when they also have overcome their domestic pandemic. So we, I think, should also focus on the non-traditional market with them, we may amplify our capability to recovery by tapping into the potential of this non-traditional market, in which are more optimistic and more willing to spend more in the post-pandemic. This is, of course, not to say that we should also not neglect our traditional partners, since they are more. They will also at the end support us and more cooperation in the future. We've seen. I mean, it was mentioned also that yes, our cooperation with the Latin America countries, as well as our cooperation also with the European countries, important. I think at the moment we can look back and see that many of those sectors mentioned, we have actually prioritized pre-COVID, but I think we need to really go back again and look how we can follow through some of those aspects that we have planned, I think, pre-pandemic. I think our proposed strategy to tap the potential of global market will be first to ensure the significant improvement for our own national business and investment climate. So I think before we can even go out there, I think we need to understand that we need to improve our own climate. And second, ensure on the ground openness and business facilitation with all businesses partners. And we also have to prioritize our engagement with the business partner which have overcome the pandemic. I think we will see who recover faster. And we also need to pay special attention to the non-traditional market. So these are just some of the, I think, strategy post COVID that I can share. I was asked before what happened to our EU CEPA and so forth. I think negotiation is still continuing on. Whether that, of course, there has been some delays. I'm sure there have been delays on trade agreements and negotiations and so forth. But I think at the end, I always say to businesses that we are actually, I feel like a computer being reboot. So I think rebooting, meeting a new normal, I think we need to look at things in different perspective. Definitely we cannot work alone, and we need more partners. We need to go beyond our own comfort zone. So that's from me for now, and I look forward for more discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Sita. Thank you very much. So the last speaker, being the last speaker, of course, we were confronted with a big challenge of the time limitation. So Pak Sumit, we have less than 30 minutes, but let me introduce Pak Sumit first. You know, other than being a good partner for me on the golf course, Pak Sumit is also a good friend that he has already been a CEO of HSBC in Indonesia for quite some time. He was also CEO of HSBC in Vietnam and also covering other regions. He served in New York as well as in Hong Kong. So with the vast experience that he has, Pak Sumit is also one of the true believer of the Indonesian potentials, and he is convinced that he will be able to connect Indonesia with the rest of the world. So Pak Sumit, I give you the floor, but please bear in mind that we need also to spend some time for responding to some of the questions. Pak Sumit, floor is yours.
Terima kasih, Pak Nura. His Excellency Ambassador Mahendra, Vice Minister Foreign Affairs, Bu Shinta, Pak Nura, Dr. Pablo. Privileged to speak here at this forum. I will be brief and I will take a lot less than the 30 minutes which you've allocated. I think Bu Shinta, Dr. Pablo have done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of providing a lot of data, in terms of what Europe is doing, what Latin America is doing, and what Indonesia is doing. So I will not have any slides for you because I think we've already seen enough data. What I wanted to talk about is broadly in terms of economic trends, right? Where Indonesia is today, what is Indonesia's economic future relative to the rest of the world, and how can Indonesia increase its competitiveness in ASEAN and in other countries in terms of attracting global investment. So to kind of evaluate this, I would like to sort of divide us into 3 different time periods, right? And I will call these time periods BC, DC, and AC, where BC is before COVID, DC is where we are now during COVID, and AC is the period we are all aspiring towards, but we don't know when it's going to start, which is after COVID. So a quick look at BC, right? Because, you know, given what's happening right now, we may have forgotten what happened just around 3 months ago. So before COVID actually started, the world economy was slow, but it was steady, right? It wasn't spectacular. US was chugging along towards a recovery. Europe was doing reasonably well. Asia was kind of coming together as well. So it wasn't brilliant, but it was actually showing an optimistic trend. If you look at consumption and manufacturing, we've been seeing this trend happening for a couple of decades now, gradually. And Ambassador Mahendra referred to it, right? Consumption is gradually moving from the west to the east, because as GDP per capita in Eastern countries, in emerging markets like Indonesia, as GDP per capita is increasing, consumption power is increasing, and therefore consumption trends gradually is moving across. Manufacturing investment wealth similarly over the last couple of decades have gradually, slowly been moving from the west to the east. ASEAN has been gradually increasing in terms of prominence. You know, even 10 years ago, not many people are talking about ASEAN. ASEAN has become much more of a buzzword today, much more of a strength to reckon with in terms of being a viable option for investment and creating supply chain. And what also happened, right, immediately before COVID is globalization was taking a bit of a backseat. You know, we had Brexit happening, we had the situation in the US where there's some nationalization happening, we had the trade wars between US and China. So globalization looked like being slightly on the back foot. And then, of course, came COVID, right? So what's happening right now in the period which I will call DC, as in during COVID? Panura mentioned in his opening address that the Eurozone in the first quarter has contracted 3.8% compared to 2019. That's pretty big, right? So forget about a growth of 5% like Indonesia has been experiencing. It's contracted by 3.8. If you look at job losses, the news came out yesterday. The US has now got 30 million people out of jobs. The last week, an additional 3.8 million people registered for unemployment benefits. That's huge, right? So what's happening in Europe, in the US is really unprecedented. It hasn't happened for decades. We have companies like Shell. Shell has, for the first time, I think since the last 30 or 40 years, not paying a dividend. So unprecedented times. We don't know how long these times are going to last. So, you know, I know there are many predictions going on in terms of what will our GDP be. I would very humbly submit that we don't really know. We're operating on the basis of the assumptions we have today. You know, if COVID continues, because there could be a wave 2, there could be a wave 3, there could be a wave 4. We don't know when this is going to actually finish. For smaller businesses who do not have a large amount of cash, their ability to survive will depend upon the longevity of this overall piece. In HSBC today, we are seeing today in Indonesia, many of our businesses are still very strong, still quite vibrant. They've taken a month's hardship. They can take 2 months hardship. They can potentially take 3 months hardship. But if this continues into second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter of 2020, I think you'll see significantly enhanced adversity and difficulty because many businesses will shut down, and that will have a knock-on impact because banks will then have much higher non-performing loans, and in turn, you know, that will be a kind of cascading scenario. But we are seeing, right, purchasing power is going to go down. People are having salaries being cut. People are having job losses. Consumption, therefore, in the short term is going to go down. Bhushenta mentioned about government stimulus. Different countries have taken different approaches, but it is very difficult for the government to compensate for a broad trend like this. So to my mind, the during COVID piece, no one really knows how long it's going to extend to. As and when we do, it will bring about a lot more certainty. So let's talk about what happens when light dawns, right? What happens in the post-COVID scenario whenever it actually starts? So we don't know for certain, because of course a lot will depend upon the kind of beating which our businesses have taken. But I expect in some time there will be some form of nationalism, because people will be saying, let's make sure we protect the businesses in our own countries. So the anti-globalization piece might continue for a little while longer. However, companies and firms will be under pressure. They'll be under pressure to cut cost. They'll be under pressure to increase revenue. They'll be under pressure to survive by making profit. If firms want to cut cost, they will have to produce in a low-cost environment, which means they will have to look to Asia, to countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, low-cost manufacturers, if they want to cut the cost. If they want to increase the revenue, again, the point which Ambassador Mahendra made some time back, Asia is emerging as a consumption hub. GDP per capita is going up. If they want to earn more revenue, they will have to expand into markets outside of their own European or American markets. They will have to look at Asia. So to my mind, Asia and the focus on Asia and consumption and manufacturing moving to Asia, even in the post-COVID period, will continue to be a reality. It may happen a little bit slowly. The nationalistic spurts could happen, but overall, the broad trend will not change. So let's take a quick look at Indonesia, right? So how does Indonesia figure in all of this? And Bhushenta spoke about the omnibus bill, etc. But Indonesia, in terms of macroeconomics, has been pretty much a poster child for any emerging market for some time. Inflation before COVID was less than 3%. Interest rates had come down to single digits. The rupiah was pretty stable vis-a-vis the US dollars for the last 18 months, again, pre-COVID period. Foreign reserves had hit a peak of 125 billion US dollars. The political system, the social system, absolutely stable. Very difficult to compete with Indonesia in terms of macroeconomics, right? So logically, you would expect that pretty much all companies in the US, in Europe, would be lining up to knock on Indonesia's doors to say, when can we enter Indonesia? But we've seen that also has not happened. And when the US-China trade was at its peak, there's much publicized news about 33 companies leaving China, all going to Vietnam, none coming to Indonesia. And part of the reason for that is because some companies believe that the regulatory environment in Indonesia continues to be complex, hence the omnibus law. Sometimes companies are not absolutely sure that Indonesia is going to be as welcoming of foreign investment as competing countries like Vietnam are. And also, and this is a point which we've discussed before, maybe Indonesia needs to spruce up its marketing efforts, its advocacy efforts in engaging with European countries, in the US, with the US, with North America, with Latin America, because oftentimes many of the people, many in these companies, in these continents, they know about China, they know about India, they've heard of Singapore, but many of them might not be fully aware of what Indonesia brings to the table. So my submission is going to be this, right? In the post-COVID world, competition amongst ASEAN countries is going to heighten. We've already discussed that companies will be reluctant to have complete dependency on one country like China. So we believe that many companies will actually look at a China plus one, a China plus two, a China plus three strategy. And the question then comes about is, how does Indonesia stand up in scrutiny, right? With a Vietnam or a Malaysia or a Singapore or a Thailand or a Philippines, etc. And to me, Indonesia, frankly, we talk of ASEAN, Indonesia today contributes to 33% of ASEAN GDP. It's a $1 trillion economy. It contributes to 40% of ASEAN population. Whether you like it or not, Indonesia is too big to ignore. But my submission would be Indonesia can significantly ramp up its attractiveness. Firstly, I'm hoping Bu Shinta and her colleagues can really get the omnibus bill passed, because if that happens, I'm absolutely confident it'll be a signal change in the attractiveness in terms of ease of working and doing business in Indonesia. But thereafter, I think it calls for a sustained marketing and advocacy effort, where Indonesia liaises with countries which are pumping in billions of dollars into the country, even today, the US, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Canada. There are a bunch of different countries where we now focus on them. We look at what are the key sectors. I know that, for the US-Indonesia corridor, we already have identified 5 key sectors, right? We've got garments, we've got leather, we've got footwear, we've got IT. So we already know what the US-Indonesia key strategic corridors are. But we need to do this across every single one of the major corridors for trade and investment flows coming into Indonesia. Because this is what Vietnam is doing, this is what Thailand is doing, this is what the Philippines is doing. And on the face of it, Indonesia's competitiveness is significantly above all of them. But we need to market ourselves a lot better in a lot more structured way to be able to realize the benefits in a post-COVID world. So I will keep my comments to 15 minutes, Panura, to leave some questions, some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Pak Sumit. Thank you very much. I think the key words here that you mentioned is, of course, we have heard from Ibu Sinta, we have heard from the previous speakers, and you are making a very important underline here, that Indonesia has to ramps up its boosting to boost its potential. Marketing strategy. So we need to have the people in the US, in Europe, and Latin America to know how big is Indonesia, how Indonesia's attitude toward ease of doing business, how Indonesia developing its competitiveness. So I think this is something that we will take note of this, and of course we will do this on how we will be able to boost our potentials for the people all over the world to know what Indonesia is all about. So that was the reason why the theme of this seminar is a smart partnership. So, I mean, we need to choose and select based on the potential, based on the ability to provide mutual benefits, based on the ability to deliver, and so on and so forth. So I have less than 15 minutes for question and answer, but I have some question already. I don't want to elaborate each and every questions, but there are questions addressed to Pak Mahendra. Pak Mahendra is still here, and also to Pak Pablo, and perhaps Bu Shinta can also respond to it. The general feeling when we are talking about, let's stop the dependency on one major production base. So how are we going to do that? Of course, Pablo was talking about relocation. What needed by the industry is cost. Bu Shinta underlined that as well. So tell us, there are some questions here, how really to change the dependency trend and developing the diversified production-based supply chains, and how Indonesia will be able to participate in that. Especially, there are also questions, how the SMEs in Indonesia to participate in this relocation business. So my question to Pablo, perhaps based on his experience, how long is the relocation will take place? I mean, from the preparation until the setting up of the industry or factory, how long does it take? So let me address first to Pak Mahendra. If Pak Mahendra is still there?
Yes, actually, I was about to leave. But go ahead.
Yeah, Pak, if you could give us a very short response on this relocation, how to reduce the dependency.
Well, I think all the speakers made very good remarks on this particular question, and of course, there is no single and easy answer on that. But I think if we want to start doing this more effectively, I think focus on what we have already have on the ground. Yeah? Looking at the range of industries and sectors in the manufacturing, in the agriculture, in the mining. I think we have so much available. And one thing we have to remember about Indonesia is that what makes us more resilient is our own sectoral diversification. But what is missing there is a good integration between sectors and industries. So while we have the fast, very much availability of sectors and diversified industries, but they are mostly stand-alones of themselves rather than being part of integrated and build a strong synergy. And this is where I think we should not focus on all of these industries to be the regional and global champions. We just identify a few, but we make sure that we have the availability and the capacity to fill in the gaps, which otherwise now we have situations, for instance, like automotive industries. While we have brands or cars that produce by 90% of our own locally produced manufacturing base, but most of the components and parts are still imported. On the other hand, we have a very large domestic market. So that is even in the more sophisticated sector. In the footwear, it's the same. We are one of the largest footwear suppliers and exporters in the world. But I think 60–70% of the intermediary inputs are still imported. So again, these are the homeworks that we need to do to fill in the gap between the sectors. Otherwise, the effectiveness of our presence in the region and globally are still a big challenge. Thank you very much, Pak Ngurah.
Thank you, Pak Mahendra. Well, I think if I may also add to that point, the importance of working together with ASEAN, as Pak Mahendra mentioned earlier. In the context of ASEAN Economic Community, we have what we call as the competitive production base, which is ASEAN competitive production base. So I think if I may...
I just want to comment that because the previous speaker looked at ASEAN again from the existing perspectives as competitors. Yes, of course, we are competing to a large extent in many of our industries. But what ASEAN and ASEAN people have not realized and make benefit of up to now is ASEAN is no longer just a supplier. We are markets, and this is what I think we need to ensure and promote within ASEAN itself. Only then we can also convince others to look at us from a different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Mahendra. So, well, Pak Mahendra, we know exactly that this is the May Day, and we organize this to celebrate May Day. So, so Pak Pablo and later on, Bu Sinta and Pak Sumit. Pak Pablo?
Very quickly. To me, the relocation aspect is not something which is going to happen quick and soon. It has to be proved that there are competitive alternative solutions, and this proving is not given. And therefore, for me, there is an intermediate phase which might be quite long, where countries like Indonesia might be a real alternative for the entire production space in different industries. So my clear answer is, I don't see the relocation back to home countries coming soon. Definitely not. There is still too much way to go.
Thank you, Dr. Pablo. Pak Sumit, Bu Sinta? Bu Sinta, Pak Sumit?
Yes, thank you, Pak Ngurah. So I think actually many of the issues that's discussed here about relocations, about diversification, I think this is all issues that we are aware of. And I think COVID, we are already trying to improve our investment climate, trying to improve our regulatory framework so that we can take advantage of this situation. Now, the point is, I'm gonna twist it another way. My question is, can this COVID be actually an opportunity for Indonesia? Because then we are leveling off in terms of our other country that has been doing reform much faster than us. This is actually the message that we need to give our government, right? In other words, if we can use this COVID as a lead in accelerating all our reform, then we may be being in the same competitiveness and a playing field. Because I think this is really the key. We have been lagging behind, and we have to admit that. The government is really trying its best to do its reform, and it has been taking quite some time. But now maybe it's opening, it's a wake-up call, really. Now it is an opportunity for us to run with it. Can we do it? That's my question, right? Because for business, we want to. We know that we need to survive this, but we also need to look at something more positive, more optimistic, right? Because Indonesia, I mean, we have everything here. I mean, come on, compared to other countries. So I think it's a no-brainer. If we are committed that we want to do this, we should make this leap and give this as an opportunity rather than just trying to be in the same position. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Sinta. I think you underline a very important point here. The saying that Indonesia believes is always di setiap bencana selalu ada hikmahnya. So how we will take the potential or the opportunity in every disaster, in every I mean, in this COVID situation, we need to use this as a momentum for us to really fix that was not fixed before, and then we make it faster. Pak Sumit?
Yeah, look, I just want to reinforce, I think, what Bu Sinta said, right? I mean, I think we all acknowledge that this country has everything. But we also acknowledge that given the fact that this country has everything, we've actually underperformed. So I completely agree. I think this is an opportunity. You know, it's an opportunity. You know, Bu Sinta mentioned some time back in a presentation, this is a reset, right? So once you've pressed the reset button, whoever's quickest of the blocks is going to have an advantage. And what has happened in the past, it's happened in the past, is water under the bridge, but we can actually make a fresh beginning. So to my mind, in a post-COVID world, right, where the reset button has been pressed, if we can demonstrate that business, private sector is working hand in hand with the government, they're taking reforms forward, we are making bold, logical steps to bring about, ease of investment for domestic business, as well as to bring in sustainable foreign, right, investments coming in. That could be a really powerful combination. So frankly, I completely endorse that comment. I think if we can put together a plan, private sector working hand in hand with the government, right, and with a very focused approach to figure out which are the sectors where we want to promote domestic investment, which are the sectors where we will value sustainable foreign investment coming through, and which are the sectors from which countries, right? So we can't just be a kind of throw our net out into the water, but we need to have a focused approach, and then depending upon the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce, the respective sectors, targeted approach for what investments we want from Germany, what we want from Latin America, what we want from the US.
So that is the reason why the theme is smart partnership. So we need to develop a smart partnership here, Pak Sumit. Well, before closing, we don't have any more time here. But of course, I cannot bring more questions. But basically, the questions are around that area. But before closing, I would like to inform our colleague here that we have over 160 participants through YouTube, and also over 110 participants by using Zoom. So it's widely covered, and I think we have a very fruitful discussion. Of course, this is not going to be once event. We need to continue having the conversation on how we are going to move forward. Our president, President Joko Widodo, has already made it very clear while Indonesia is now concentrating in handling the pandemic, we are also have to make sure that we will be also, doing the recovery sooner. So he was expecting that the recovery can be already taking shape, next year. And this is not, this is not without any supporting evidence. We have been through the financial crisis. We have been through economic crisis. We were, I think, relatively making recovery very soon. So we hope that that is a note that we will leave from this conversation. The other note that I would like also to leave here is that Dr. Pablo mentioned a lot about technology, everything about tech, everything about Industry 4.0. Next year, Indonesia will be the partner country. It's supposed to be this year. Next year, Indonesia will be the partner country of Hannover Fair, the largest industrial fair in the world. So this is the second time Indonesia has been, asked as a country partner. So we look forward to have a continued discussion on how we will do the marketing strategy, as Pak Sumit mentioned earlier. And, final point, of course, we have already been having a lot of CEPA, SEPA agreement. We are developing FTA. But one thing that we need also to take into account when we are talking about tech, which is Singapore, together with New Zealand and Chile, signed already free trade agreement on digital economy. So we would like to leave this for our colleague to think whether this is also something that we can also pursue, because we see this is what we have down the road. So thank you very much, colleagues, for your participation, for your contribution. Terima kasih Pak Mahendra for the participation. Terima kasih semuanya. I think this is good to also our colleague who are fasting, to kill time, but also at the same time to feed their brain, which is very good for us, for those colleagues who are doing their fasting. Terima kasih. We will see you again, and stay safe as well as salam sehat. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.